From the world of AV control and programming with James King, I'm Steve Greenblatt, and this is Ask the Programmer. James, it's great to be back just one episode after our 6-month anniversary.
Oh, it's great. Again, I'm still shocked that we did 6 months and we're still going now. I'm looking forward to another 6 months here.
Absolutely. If anybody hasn't checked out episode 26, it's a real good one. And James and I reflected back as to our experiences and what we've learned, and just a little bit of taking inventory about this podcast and the whole community that we're trying to bring together. It's they could be very valuable. And if you haven't been following us from the beginning, it gives a little bit of a recap of where this podcast came from and what our goals are and what our mission is. So really cool, James. We got Jim Spencer reached out and he provided a comment on episode 24 that we talked about with regard to troubleshooting, and he talked about, agreed with us that troubleshooting is a real art. And he talked a little bit also about when you troubleshoot and you're in certain types of environments, and he comes from the higher ed, as you do. He said sometimes you only get a half hour to fix a problem, or you really don't get a chance to really get to the root of the problem. You're just happy to get it fixed so the show can move on. And we were talking a little bit, and we thought this would be a good topic for us to elaborate on. Kind of ties in with really feeding off of the community. And one of the things that I know I can share about is when you're troubleshooting and when you identify a problem, did you fix it with a Band-Aid or did you solve it? So, and there's a big distinction there, because one is that you made the problem go away, but the other is that you figured out where it came from so it doesn't happen again, hopefully. Do you have any examples or stories, or how might that tie in with some of your experiences?
Oh, definitely. I definitely have my war stories there. Trying to think of actually a recent one I just encountered was it's a room that's not used much. It's actually only scheduled for one class this semester, and so they only meet 3 times this week. So Monday, Wednesday, Fridays they meet, and they're the only class that use the room. And it came across my desk that the computer wouldn't display, but when a tech would go, they were able to get the computer display. So they're like, oh, must have been a fluke in the system. We're good to go. And then they reported again, their next class, it's not working. So I went down, I looked into it, and in my troubleshooting, I was like, all right, it seems like it's a bad input on the switcher. So I switched it over to a new input, updated code to address the input change. I'm like, all right, we should be good. And then 2 days later, when his next class, a report came back in, same issue. So I had to go down, and I really sat down and had to go through all the steps. And I actually determined it seemed to be a bad HDMI cable. So when the computer shut off, the EDID never talked with the switcher, so it never got a valid video when he booted back up. So, but in all our testing, we just reboot the computer. You never actually shut it down, so we never encountered that issue. So to us, it was fixed, but it really wasn't. So we did a Band-Aid. We got him up and running for his classes, but we never truly solved the problem. I think we did today because I didn't get a call back. So I did it on Friday. He was supposed to meet today. Didn't get a call of an issue. So I'm sick and to fix.
I think that's a perfect example, quite honestly. And I think you touched on a lot of important things. One being fixing the issue Well, first, we always tell people, especially when it comes to programming, can you recreate it? And that's usually the first step, because if you can't recreate the problem, it's hard for us to be able to troubleshoot it, and it's hard for us to be able to resolve it with code. I I tell people a lot, and this hopefully will make people smile, is that we could look through our code all the time, but bugs just don't like reveal themselves. It's not like we're trying we can lure them out or something like that. They don't come labeled that they're a bug. So we have to be able to find the problem by recreating it. And then once you're able to do that, and like you mentioned, you fixed it, and in the short term it worked. But part of that also was going through all of the steps to try to figure out how you can break it. And that's a lot of how troubleshooting works, and fixing problems is knowing how to figure out pass all the tests of being able to break it again.
Yeah, I always sit there and try to do that. When I code a system, I do look at it and go, okay, how can a user break this? Purposely or not purposely. People do odd things. We just encounter a recent one where we have it was easy with touch panels. So when you turn on the projector, we have a warm up and cool down cycle. And I would just throw a splash screen over all the projector controls. So for the countdown, since going to keypads, and we've been using keypads for many years now, we can't throw a splash panel over the keypad. Buttons are still getting pressed, and we never had an issue until this semester. I started getting reports that projector wasn't working, and I would walk in and the projector's on, but it's muted, or AV mute, whatever term you use. We use black burst, but the system was out of sync with it, not displaying that it was black burst. And I had to run through all my tests in my development, and I couldn't replicate the issue. And then finally I was able to replicate it, which again, to me, I wasn't sure why a user would do this, but there was only way I would replicate it was if they hit the on button, so the projector's turning on, and then hit the black burst button, it threw everything out of sync. To me, I'm like, why would a user do that? But they must be. It must finally have this one user who they hit on and then hit black burst and throw the system out of whack. So what I had to do now is go back and address that in code. So during the warm up and cool down, that button doesn't do anything.
Well, and I think that's yet another good point, is really seeing how the user uses it, because or being able to simulate. And even back to your previous example with the computer, sometimes something happens overnight. So the first time the system's used is different than the second time it might be used, because all the components are already powered up, or you're not coming out of that off state per se. So it's really, really interesting. And it's also helpful to observe how people are using from a programming perspective, what are the steps that they're using, and what are they encountering? Because sometimes when we test, and I think we've talked about this before, our way that we would test the system is skewed, because we understand how the system should work. So I think that naturally you're not going to do it in a very unorthodox way.
I agree. Totally agree with that. Because like I said, I tried to think of ways the users can break it. And again, we know how the system's supposed to work. We know when you're turning on a projector that there is a warm up and cool down cycle. Our users don't know that. I wouldn't expect them to know that. That's not something common knowledge. People walk on the street know this. So we need to make sure we address those in code And like I said, it was easy to do when we were using touch panels. Um, Now I got lazy in my coding and didn't address it in the keypad. And like I said, I was safe for what I've been doing AV programming with keypads probably 5 or 6 years now. And it's now rearing its head with the same code. So it's easy to fix, but it's something I should have done right in the beginning. But without knowing how the users use it, then I wasn't taking that situation into account.
So the alternative to that would have been maybe that you go into that room and you kind of brute force it or override it without really understanding why the problem is happening.
Yep.
And I think we've all done that before, whether you're working late or whether you're under the gun or you just at at your wit's end, that you just want to get something working. So you brute force your code to fix or seemingly fix a problem, but don't really realize what is causing the problem. Because
Yeah.
taking the time to really dissect it and get to the bottom of it takes time, and honestly, it's not easy for everybody. It's I've seen several times where we've had a module, let's say that's a special version that somebody created for this one system or this one time because they couldn't get something working, and they didn't necessarily have the have the luxury to be able to figure out why it wasn't working, and then you end up with this very, very unknown state of which do I use, the old module, do I use the new module, and and was this a one-off situation that just occurred, or was it a real issue that we need to get to the bottom of?
Yeah. I can totally understand. We have those. We all have those ugly fixes, I like to call them, where they just work, get the solutions done. I know I mentioned this in the past episodes. I mean, I kind of have one because I know what the issue is, but I can't replicate the issue. I've seen it happen, but in all my test environments, I can't make the system do it. It just randomly does it itself. And it could be 6 months, it could be 3 months, it's a random time, and where the system kind of goes haywire. And it, by what I can see, is it's not processing the string commands coming in correctly. So they're getting jumbled, so the system then reads them wrong. I don't know why. I don't understand why they're coming in jumble. And but I had to address that in code. So I call that an ugly fix, but it's a fix and it's working. I haven't had that problem since.
And to your point too, sometimes we have to also understand that we do have those odd situations. So whether it's a cable, whether it's an environmental issue, sometimes power can cause weird things to happen. I had some really crazy situation that it's too long to get into, but at a job site there was some type of electromagnetic force that was causing a signal to get just almost scrambled for or creating noise. And it just would happen so randomly, just like you said. And the amount of time spent trying to figure that out. And I think part of what we said too in our troubleshooting episode is that the best way to really get to the bottom of something is change one thing, do a full test, change one thing, do a full test. You have to really eliminate your variables. And but when something is not a consistent problem, it can drive you batty.
Yeah, I actually had a tech from another company tell me this story, and it was one of those environmental things that they were lucky to figure out. They got called into this high profile CEO's office where they say randomly the displays would go haywire. and no one can figure it out. And they had to bring in like the A team to fix it. And they're trying everything. All the cables were good. All the wirings were good. Code was good. And they're banging their head on the wall. And one of the guys like, I need a drink, went out, hit the vending machine outside the office, and it went haywire. The vending machine was sending a pulse through, messing everything up.
And that's a very similar story, and that
Yeah.
it doesn't shock me, but that's like an AV classic, that should be. So I guess, Jim, if you have more that you want to share with us on this topic, please do. And if anybody else has a good story that they want to share or some tips, because I think that this is a really important thing, especially for people who are new with programming, is that we really have to be careful not to fix situations, but solve problems, because it's, from a programmer's standpoint, we want everybody to look good and know that we did our job properly, but also it's causes a lot of concerns and unreliability. And if a client is seeing something that's happening randomly, or it doesn't get resolved, they lose confidence in the solution. So, that's our little tip for the day on Ask the Programmer. But if I'll toss it over to you, James, if you have any closing remarks. Otherwise, share how people can get in touch with you.
I think your closing remarks pretty good. The only additional I have is, I always tell people this. If your users are tinkering and messing with the system, it means the system's not doing what they need. So you need to figure out why. Like you said, figure out how the user's using it, and how they're breaking the system, so you can tackle their needs. But you can reach me at Twitter, AV_James King. I'm on LinkedIn, James King. You can also find me with anything with Hdmi or Higher Ed AV digital magazine, where I write the IT and AV column.
And for me, Steve Greenblatt, on all social media platforms for the most part, most active on Twitter and on LinkedIn. Please feel free to connect. Also, make sure that you're subscribing and sharing your comments and feedback either on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. We're trying to be in as many places as people can find us. And we also appreciate Jim Spencer for helping us with today's topic. And this is a good example of what we're looking to do, and the ways that we can answer questions for the AV programmer community, as well as continue the conversation. So thank you for that, Jim. And if anybody has more to share on this, please let us know, and also share additional thoughts that you have for future episodes or future discussions. With that said, this has been Ask the Programmer.